it's time to get a little stuff done on the motor. Since I got my parts in, I need to get ready to put it back together. First thing, since these pistons are press fit pins, we're going to have to press the old ones out. The later model ones had the clips full floating, and you just push them out by hand, but these had to be pressed out, and then when we put the new pins in, we'll need to heat the small end of the rod and slip it together. But since we're not reusing the pistons, we can just use the press to push them out. Now, I'm not keeping track of which position anything came out of anymore because the pistons will be new. The rods don't care because they ride on the bearings. So I did pull the bearings out. I did check to make sure on each half shell that they are standard. I have worked on engines where one shell will be a little thicker than the other if they didn't build their crank right. But hopefully everything in this is standard on all of it. Now we do need to keep the orientation of the rod with the piston the same. So I was looking at it. The markings you see here, the lettering, it's only on one side, and it's on the flat side of the rod. And that is the side where your little dot is there that faces the front of the engine. So you know that the writing goes to the dot side. So now we'll get this in the press and shove the pin out. So what I'm going to do is I've got a couple of sockets, same length. I'm going to put right here and here, set it in there, and then use another socket on the top to push the pin through. Set those on the press plate. Set this to where both sockets are evenly in those little pockets. The other socket on top. Looks a little wobbly, but as soon as it gets some pressure on it, it works just fine. And since we want to make sure not to damage the small end of the rod in any way, I'm also going to use the propane torch and put just a little heat on this, try to expand it out, just to make it a little easier to press out. Since we're going to be heating it up anyway to put the new pin in. Don't want to spend a lot of time heating this up because unlike just heating the small end of the rod to put a cold pin in, doing it this way you're going to be heating everything up. And we're just trying to make it a little more user-friendly to come out. That little bit of heat took it up to about 150 degrees. So now, start putting some pressure on. There we go, it popped free. And the reason you don't use a press putting these back in is because you'd have to have something, some way to support the rod inside the piston so you're not stressing the piston. And they make equipment to do that, but it's just as easy to heat it up. Well, there we go. No damage to the small end. So we're in good shape. Now I just got to do that 6 more times. And there we go. We got 8 ready to go rods. No problems taking them out. A couple of the pistons did explode as I was pressing them out, but besides being a little startling, it wasn't any problem. That's why you don't press the pins back in. Unless you have it set up just right, you end up stressing the piston. And you don't want to end up with one like this in your engine. And these pistons probably could have been reused. Well, I'm sure they could have. They were a little scuffed, a little worn. They're probably, if you measured them, they were probably still within tolerance. But how many times have those things been heat cycled? How many explosions, have they been exposed to? And they're aluminum. And new pistons aren't that expensive for these. So it's like, not going to chance it. Plus, I didn't want to have to clean them. Okay, we are ready to put the pistons on the rods. Now, you don't really need any special equipment to do this. About the only thing you really need is, I like to use a digital thermometer to tell how hot I've got the small end of the rod, and you need a torch. You don't have to have a MAP gas torch or oxyacetylene. That's just a regular propane torch. The bucket of hot water at setting in is optional. My torch was cold and it was trying to flame out on me. So that ups the pressure, and I'm going to have to whack a couple of dogs. The whole idea is just to heat the small end of the rod up enough that it expands enough that you can slide the pin in it. And then once it cools down, it will seize up on that and hold it in place. Now, you can see that these pins end up being a little bit recessed on each side when it is centered. And you can build a jig or whatever you want to hold everything in place to where you can slide it into the right spot every time. But I normally just heat it up and then hold the rod and then just slide the pin in with my fingers like this, center it up, and then center the rod in the middle. If it's a little bit off to one side or the other, as long as it's not off far enough that your pin's rubbing the cylinder wall, which would be incredibly far off, it's not going to be a problem. I mean, you want to be as accurate as possible like anything else, but it doesn't have to be just to the thousands. Okay, now, you do have to make sure the rod is in the piston the right direction. And on these, I mark this flat side with the numbers goes to the front of the piston, or to the front of the engine. And so I like to be consistent doing this so I don't screw up. But I set the piston on the workbench with the forward side facing me. And that way when I'm handling the rod, I keep the numbers facing me. And that way when it goes together, it's in the right orientation. So we're going to heat this baby up. You're shooting for like 500 degrees on that small end, and then it'll slip right in. I'm not going to fast forward or anything, so as long as the amount of time it takes me to heat it up is exactly how long it took. You want to make sure when you start out to have the pin in the piston, but just slide it over to where it's in one side. You don't want to have it completely out, because then when you try to put everything together one-handed, you're going to be having trouble getting the pin to start. But once it's in the one side, it just slides right on through, no problem. So make sure that's forward, facing me. Fire up the torch. Just work the flame around it, roll it around like a rotisserie chicken. I kind of put a little more heat toward the base of it where it tapers down into the rod just because the metal is thicker there. The outside edge will heat up a little faster. And you want it to be as round as possible from even heating when you go to slide the pin. That's up to 420 degrees, so we need just a little more. Not a good time to get cranked. I was a little bit jealous. This motor's out of my vet, 2004 model. got these old style press-in pistons. I was looking at the 5.3 that I've got torn up, ready for a rebuild. It's a 2005, and it's got the nice full floaters. There's about 5.5. We'll just set that in there, push that right through, center it up with your fingers, and center it up in the middle. And that's all there is to it. Now when you go to slide that in there, you do have to move fast because it does cool down fast. And I have never, some guys say to freeze the pin. I've never needed to do that. I've also heard some guys that say that makes having the pin being extremely cold makes the rod cool down faster, and it was harder to get it in. So I just heat the rod up, pin at room temperature, slip it in there. It's good to go. That's all for this video. I wanted to we've got tearing them down, putting them back together. I figured that's a good spot. I know there's a lot of different videos on the internet about putting these together, but I figured since I was doing this whole series, I would just add this in too. So thank you for watching. Till next one.